in the context of where the hurt happened, that's where the healing needs to happen too. So if I was hurt in the context of a family, the only way I'm going to learn how a loving family should look like and, how it should operate is to experience that myself. So yeah, I mean, families are not perfect.
They're not perfect, but people think, I think you think like I have to, if before I'm going to foster or adopt, I have to be a perfect parent.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's what I thought. I think a lot of people think that.
Yeah.
And of course now I am a perfect parent, so I don't have to worry about it.
Me too. No. Yeah. Good company.
Welcome to Little Fish, the podcast where we honor, celebrate, and learn from small business owners and nonprofit leaders like you. I am Joel Eschenbach, and today I have Jody Jester from Bridge of Life. Jody is the director of programs at Bridge of Life. And so welcome to the podcast, Jody.
Thanks.
It's good to have you here.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, so I always just like to kind of dive right in and talk about what is your organization, what is Bridge of Life. Let's start there, and then we'll, kind of go from there.
Yeah, cool. So when I talk about Bridge of Life to people who've never heard of us before, I really emphasize two things. First of all, we're an awareness organization. So we're a faith-based nonprofit with the purpose of raising awareness of the need for more foster and adoptive homes. So that's how we started, and that's something that we'll just always kind of be true to. Mm-hmm. We have a pretty significant local need for more loving, safe families in our community. And so we just want people to know that, first of all, because I think a lot of times people think it's Sarasota, Bradenton, it's pretty affluent. We have art colleges, we have beach towns, we have snowbirds. So they think about those kinds of things when they think about our area, and they don't think child welfare crisis. So thing number one is just raising awareness and letting people know that we do have a pretty significant need locally. And then,
on the foster side or adoption side, or both?
Yeah, really both.
Okay.
So we're about 100 beds short from the foster side right now. There's a 70% chance that if you're a teenager in our community and you're taken into foster care, you're going to end up somewhere other than this community because we just have such a lack of beds. So you might have to go to Jacksonville or Miami or Tampa, somewhere else that can accommodate you. So we want to keep that from happening. Yeah. And then from an adoptive side too, we have a ton of kids in the U.S. and globally that just need safe places for one reason or another. So we really emphasize both of those things. And then just to follow up with that, to say if you're a family who has said yes to fostering or yes to adopting, you need support. And parenting kids who come from a trauma background just looks different than traditional parenting. Right. And so I know you know that. Yeah. Right. And so what can we do to kind of wrap around and support those families in a way that's meaningful to them, in a way that maybe other agencies aren't doing? Right.
That's good stuff. Yeah. And so you work mostly locally. Do you do any national work with other agencies or anything like that?
So yeah, we have a ton of partnerships locally and then also globally in Uganda.
Okay.
So, we started really as foster care in Sarasota, Manatee, and DeSoto counties, which is the 12th Circuit. And then we expanded. We had this kind of God connection into Uganda. Yeah. And so we send a couple teams there every year and have really dug in with the community there to do some ongoing sustainable community development. So that looks like clean water, a child sponsorship program, school lunch, all those kinds of things, but really walking hand in hand with that community with the ultimate goal that we wouldn't need to be there anymore. So we don't want to solve their problems for them. We just kind of want to help. And it's the same here, just to really dig in with families in a way that allows them to focus on the kids that are in their home. And we're just kind of standing behind them in a support position.
Yeah. And that's so important.
Yeah.
And, as we know, there's a pretty big adoptive community here and specifically from Uganda.
Yeah.
And we, share that. And so I think having that support for families, what does that support look like? So when you say support for families, let's talk about the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
What is that?
So we do, and these may seem like little things, but what we're learning is cumulatively they make a really big impact. So we host a monthly ladies' night out. Actually, we have two of them now. We have one in Sarasota, Manatee, and then one in Northport. Okay. So that just looks like once a month, women who are walking this journey get together and have dinner together because that community is so important. They really need that time to connect with each other, to talk about issues and concerns, to celebrate milestones that look different than other families' milestones, and just to really give them an opportunity to be with women who are like them. And then we have a ministry called Stew Crew, which is, we have volunteers that put together meals. They're freezer ready. And then we call families, or families can request a meal for us. So, just life is crazy. Like whether you have adopted kids or biological kids or step kids, it doesn't matter. Who doesn't love to be called and say, hey, can I bring you dinner tonight in a particularly hectic time of your life? So we're grateful to be able to partner with organizations like the Safe Children Coalition and One More Child. And they know, their case managers know, hey, if we have a family that's in need, we can call Bridge of Life. They'll get a meal out to a family within the next few days, if at all possible. Yeah. We also do home improvement projects, so that's pretty cool. We've done everything from yard work to cleaning and organizing to a complete bathroom renovation. And what we do is we lean into volunteers who have those skill sets, and we ask them, hey, can you swing a hammer for a few hours or, do this or that? Again, so that the family isn't burdened by things that are happening in the home, and they can really dig in relationally with the kids that are in their care. Yeah. We also offer a monthly training called The Gathering. So giving parents and caregivers the tools and the skill set that they need in order to be able to address the needs of kids who have had traumatic experiences in their life. Because whether it's a traditional orphan who's actually lost both parents, or a child who's come from the foster care system who's experienced abuse or neglect. It could be a kiddo who's living with a grandparent because the bio family situation isn't safe at the time. That's all trauma, one way or another. So it's a removal from a primary caregiver. And a lot of times on top of that, there's substance abuse, or there's neglect or physical or sexual or emotional abuse that's happened. So to parent a child who comes from that, it's just different tools.
It's different.
Yeah.
Right.
So we do a training every month that says, hey, here are some things that have happened in the life of your child.
And that's really practical stuff.
Right.
I've been to a few of them. It's good stuff.
Yeah. We had one last night, and we had a pediatric OT that came, and she specializes in trauma, and just, helping people understand, like, hey, that kid that you brought home from the orphanage, they may have skipped crawling because they were left in a crib, And so developmentally, when they're 8, here's how that's impacted, because we're supposed to crawl before we walk. And so when we miss those steps, it matters. And giving caregivers that information, I think, is powerful, because otherwise you can just look at a delay or a behavior and just be frustrated.
Get frustrated, lose patience.
Yeah. Why is my kid doing that or not doing that? And there are reasons, with the brain, with the body. And so that training is super important. And, we offer that.
What I love about that one, just sorry to keep interrupting you, but
okay.
What I love about that one is you offer childcare, but not just any childcare. You have some professionals that help out with the childcare part of that are trained with kids that come from hard places and things, right?
Yeah. So another partnership is with Samaritan Counseling. They send a counselor every month that works with kids. Kristen Bohan is the pediatric OT who partners with us. She's there, and countless others, professionals, Amanda Crump, Karen Spisak, people who are trained in trust-based relational intervention and other, curricula that we would consider to be beneficial for kids. Yeah. So they're there working with the kids, and they understand trauma. And then just a ton of amazing volunteers with huge hearts who don't necessarily have the training, but they have the patience and the love, and they're willing to stick it out with kids on a school night past bedtime when meds have worn off.
Yeah,
so, they're
like,
they're our champions. They're amazing.
And you have a lot of families who maybe may or may not get childcare on a regular basis. There's a lot of bigger families in that community, right?
Yeah, I think we had a family of 9 last night, 9 kids last night.
But you're to talk, you have 7. You have
8.
You have
8.
Correction. So, gosh. Okay. Can't even keep up with that.
But so you go, okay, here's a program. It's free. It's quality training. We're going to feed you a great dinner, and we're going to watch your kids. So, that's a win. And I always feel bad for Notion because I'm like, hey, can we turn on the registration for the gathering? And you're like, yeah. And then this past month, it was 10 hours. And I had to email you guys again and say, shut it down.
But that's a great problem.
Yeah, it's a great problem. But it just goes to show you there's more opportunity in our area. That's a huge demand. So I know we'll get into it later, but when people start going, what can I do? Well, here's a program that served almost 200 people last night that reached capacity in 10 hours. So what are we going to do about that? Because we don't want to turn families away.
Yeah, and that's foster and adoptive families for that.
Yeah, relative caregivers, and even some professionals, because of the level of the training that we're offering. We have professionals who are in child welfare who go, hey, I want to go and learn and sit under that person. So there's some peer mentoring and learning that goes on as well.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm kind of curious to hear more about how did you get involved with Bridge of Life? Why Bridge of Life? What's the story there?
Yeah. So kind of my personal story is, I was working in a position where I was working with kids, day in and day out, which I loved. And, I've always had a huge heart for kids and obviously have 8 of them myself now. So, that was a family transition through foster care and eventually adoption. Our family grew from 2 kids to 8 kids, which was amazing, and 100% unexpected, but that's the way it unfolded for us. And so I found myself professionally working with kids and then personally having a lot of kids, which was great and exhausting,
Right.
So I just kind of knew like at some point there needed to be a transition for me. I wasn't going to get rid of the kids that I had, brought into my family.
Right.
But maybe the job needed to switch at some point.
Right.
And so I remember just thinking, I want to do something that's meaningful, that still helps children, but maybe isn't working with them on the daily. And so at that point, I heard about the opportunity at Bridge of Life, and that's been almost 5 years ago. So I still feel like I'm, leading and working in that space that really caters to children, but not, personally responsible for them from 9 to 5.
Right. Because you have a horde of children of your own to be responsible for.
Yep.
That's awesome. What's kind of in your roles or different roles you've had at Bridge of Life, what's a challenge that you've run into? And how have you worked through that challenge? I think
probably the biggest challenge is just back to that awareness piece, because this is a really big issue. It's a complex issue, and there are a lot of organizations and entities that kind of play into it. And so it can feel for people very overwhelming. Yeah. First of all, it's emotional. We know that a ton of adults that are walking around today have been abused. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are the kind of national stats. Wow. So you start talking about this and you realize that you're probably talking to a population that has their own personal baggage. And then on top of that, there are people who they have barriers in their mind that aren't really there. They're there in their mind, but they're not actual barriers. Okay. So I can't foster because, or I can't adopt because. And so they kind of close the door on that being a possibility. And so I think that's kind of our ongoing big picture struggle is how do we approach this topic, which is really sensitive and really complicated, in a way that is approachable and conversational and feels solvable. Like what can I possibly do when we start talking about these national and global statistics or even local ones? So how can we lead the conversation with grace, not make people feel obligated or guilty if they're not able to help in the way that they, feel like we're saying. And just really have an open, caring conversation, and then really following up with people and going, this doesn't have to mean that you open up your own home. It might, like that might be the way that you're being led. But there are a billion other ways that you can pour into this space in a positive way. And so really keeping that conversation open and approachable, I think is a big one for us. Yeah,
for sure. I bet. And so some of the ways you do that's through educating people. When you were talking about the awareness side, like you mentioned, people say, well, things that are in their head, but aren't actually barriers. Can you give an example of maybe one of those?
Yeah. So like, I don't make enough money, or my house is not big enough. That's a huge one. My house is not big enough. I don't have enough time. Adoption is expensive. It's free through the state, by the way. Right. So a lot of people don't know that. So, what about medical care? There are post-adoption subsidies even available in some cases, so you can continue to get support. You can continue to get medical care. So I think people think like the logistical kinds of things, time, money, space. And I'm always like, man, if your heart is being pulled in that direction, let's at least have a conversation about what some of those perceived barriers are. If they're still there at the end of the conversation, there's your answer. Then definitively that's not for me. But I think that there are so many of those that just aren't really there. Can I be single and foster? Is there an upper age limit? Is there a lower age limit? Those kinds of things. So,
Right. Yep. Okay. So what do you, in your role, kind of what do you spend your days doing? I know it's all over the place, right? We all wear a lot of different hats running small organizations, but what does your day-to-day kind of look like?
Yeah, it's definitely very different every day, and that's one of the things I love about it. So it's like, what am I going to do today?
Yeah,
you know,
well, today you're podcasting.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You know, there's a lot of because our organization is small, and because we offer so many supportive, like kind of wraparound programs, we rely heavily on volunteers. So I work part-time for the organization. We've got a girl that does kind of our QuickBooks and accounting in a part-time capacity, and we just hired one other part-time girl. So
3 part-time total. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then an amazingly engaged and involved board and like an army of volunteers.
Yeah.
So I would say a lot of just what I'm doing is trying to identify new volunteers, trying to care for the volunteers that I already have, you know, train and just keep them engaged, help them understand what they're doing really matters, you know, so they come back next month. Hopefully they're not only hearing from me when I need something, although, you know, that it just happens. Sometimes it's like, well, it's that time of month again. Can you volunteer? You know? So there's a lot of that. And then just, you know, we do a couple big programs a year, a fundraising dinner that's coming up. So I do kind of some event coordination type things, you know, hey, where's it going to be? What are we going to eat? What do the invitations look like?
The really in the weeds technical stuff.
Yeah. So, you know, and it's like, okay, I need to go buy stamps. And so there's just a lot of that kind of like random, you know, stuff that pops up. And then of course, just the family support piece. So, you know, you've got a family that just transitioned a sibling group of 3 into their home. You know, how can we step into that space and help them? So those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know with a lot of nonprofits, the volunteer side, like you said, is a huge part of that. And so coordinating volunteers, keeping that up. But I love that you're doing it with a staff of part-time people. Because really, I mean, that's part of what we're talking about in this podcast is, look, I mean, a lot of amazing people are doing amazing things with very small groups of people.
Right.
And I love that. I love all the work that you're doing with that crew. Not that it would be bad if you had 20. I hope you do someday.
Right.
But,
Me too.
You're making a big difference now where you're at. So I love that.
Yeah, for sure. And then
Very
just to think about, you know, like we don't have a physical building space either. So all these programs are happening somewhere. And so just to talk about the strength of partnership that exists in our community, that we have churches and businesses that'll say like, hey, use our space for free.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of stuff. So we are able to do more because we've got that collective effort.
Yeah.
Really cool to be a part of.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about kind of the world of adoption and foster care and what's a challenge. So you talked about a challenge in the organization and that you face, but what's a challenge in the world of foster care and adoption that you run into?
I think in our area specifically, and it's probably everywhere like this, you know, you hear people say the system is broken. And so that's kind of probably the big picture answer is this perception of the system being broken, and also the reality of there are, you know, gaps and could we really create a perfect system?
Yeah, there is no perfect
like
system.
It's a horrible situation if you think about it. You know, like you have kids who are being removed from their families because they've been abused, abandoned, or neglected, or their parents have died. So that's horrible. And so to think that we could step into that without issues is impossible, you know? So then you've got people who are coming at it from all different angles. You have case managers and judges and guardian ad litems and foster parents and bio parents, and it's messy. I mean, that's a lot of emotion, you know, wrapped up around people deciding what's best in the life of a child. So I think we all enter into that space with the best of intentions, but we all come at it with different lenses of what we think the best thing is. So it just gets sticky.
Right. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And the poor child is the one who kind of doesn't have the say in any of it.
Right.
They kind of get thrown in the middle of that. But yeah. So the foster care system is really our modern alternative for orphanages that used to exist, right? I mean, in America anyway, foster care exists all around the world to some extent, but in different places. But yeah, it's an interesting setup. But I mean, the idea there, and I know you guys talk about this a lot, is children and families. So how important it is to have the family structure, no matter how that everybody thinks. And when you were talking about one of the things that holds people back, I've also heard, and even myself thought like, well, I'm not good enough to do this, right? I don't have the best family. I don't parent. I'm not going to parent the best way. But ultimately, I've heard you guys talk a lot about the family as the place where kids can grow and thrive and learn. And I love that. So
and I've heard people say, like, in the context of where the hurt happened, that's where the healing needs to happen too. So if I was hurt in the context of a family, the only way I'm going to learn how a loving family should look like and, how it should operate is to experience that myself. So families are not perfect.
They're not perfect, but people think, I think you think like before I'm going to foster or adopt, I have to be a perfect parent.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's what I thought. I think a lot of people think that.
Yeah.
And of course now I am a perfect parent, so I don't have to worry about it.
Me too. No. Yeah. Good company. And there is training, it's not like they just go, hey, here's a kid. And it, just like everything in the world, the real life experience is what really makes you better, you know, and really leads to the learning. But there is that kind of classroom textbook. Hey, let's talk about some of these things. How would you respond? We don't just throw you in and say good luck. Yeah.
But then transitioning that textbook learning into real life, because it's messy and it's fun and crazy and emotional and all those things. And so you have you're learning the practical skills, but then bringing those into the day to day when your kid is throwing a tantrum or they're losing it or you don't really know what's behind this.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. We had a family last night attend the gathering and they were kind of wide-eyed, brand new family. And, hey, we're here for the first time. What do we do? And so I was talking with them and I found out, they're first-time parents and they just welcomed 2 teenagers into their home 2 months ago in the process of adopting them, and it's like, man, I'm really glad you're here, because you're going to need this community. That's a tough thing to say yes to, but they did it. They're doing it.
It's awesome.
And so how are we going to support them and make sure that can be successful for the whole family, not just for the kids? So
we created Little Fish as a place where small businesses can support one another and build on one another's strengths. And one of the ways that they can do that, and we want to start helping with that, is by releasing valuable content, resources, and tools. And so we're going to do just that over the next few months and into next year. So I want to invite you to join our email list. If you go to thelittlefishpodcast.com and sign up and answer a few questions, first of all, you'll immediately get 2 free resources that will help you with your business and grow your business, specifically about your website. And then also you'll get notified when new content comes out and releases. So we'd love for you to join us. Go to thelittlefishpodcast.com and sign up today. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have story after story after story we could probably talk about. Yeah. Kind of back to the leading of the organization side of things though. If you had somebody who said, I'm interested in starting, maybe it's a nonprofit, or I've had this thing on my heart that I really want to turn into something, an organization or run with it, what would you tell them? What would be your word of advice to where to start or whatever?
Yeah, I think I would just tell them, to align themselves with as many different businesses, nonprofits, whatever as possible that are kind of in that world. Don't just launch on your own, but how can you start to work in that space, maybe alongside or underneath an organization that's doing something similar for a period of time?
Yeah.
There are so many organizations in our community doing so many incredible things. It's mind-blowing to me that I've been an adoptive parent for as long as I've been, and then professionally working with Bridge Life, and I'm still always finding out about new programs, new agencies.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much already exists. So I think I'd maybe question, why do you want to do your own thing?
See what's out. Yeah, see what's out there.
Yeah,
right?
What's out there. Because then even if the ultimate answer is, I still want to do my own thing, don't recreate the wheel. There might be somebody who's already doing an excellent job in that space. A good example for us is we always have people who are, cleaning out their closets and stuff. And so they think, I want to donate to kids in foster care. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do that. We don't have the space for that.
Right.
We don't have the staff for that. But the Twig in Venice, they're an upscale foster care boutique.
Really?
They allow kids in foster care to shop monthly for free.
Wow.
Everything's new or like new, washed, hung, tagged. They have dressing rooms. It's like this personal really shopping experience. It's incredible. Take your donations to the Twig, and now we don't need to feel bad about not being able to do that, you know, because we have a partner agency that's doing it really well.
Yeah.
So I think things like that, it's like, just dig in to the community that you're already in, figure out what's already happening, and then just work in partnership. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And I can see that whether it's nonprofit or the business side. I think in the business world, people get a little more competitive, but still, even so, there's so many like cooperative partnerships that you can have with similar industries, similar businesses, similar organizations. So yeah, it's good advice for sure. What about, one of my favorite questions to ask is if you looked back and you were to tell yourself something 5 years ago or 10 years ago, what would you say? You can go any direction you want with this one.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I just had this conversation again last night, and it's like, I think if we knew what was ahead, we'd probably say a lot more no's, you know? And so I'm really glad to not have known.
Right.
I mean, we need to do the best we can with what we have. You know, I mean, I'm not saying jump into a big decision blindly or without researching it or, discussing it with your spouse, praying about it, whatever your solution to big, educate yourself. But also just like be flexible, because there is no way in the world that how that is going to end up, know, what the end of the road looks like. And so there are a lot of things that, our family is an adoptive family. If we had known, it would have been a much scarier yes. But, it's like now it's like, this is just like, we don't regret it for a second. Right. What an amazing opportunity that we've had, and how much learning we have had professionally, personally. Like, there's just so much about the parenting journey that I'm like, wow, I really need to work on myself there, and I would have been robbed of those lessons maybe if I had known more. So
then you're in it. So you're like, we're doing this.
Yeah. It's like that story where, they say if everybody just took their stuff, their baggage, their sickness, their, pain, whatever, and like threw it into a pile in the middle of the room. And then you got to walk back to the pile and pick one up, you'd pick up your own, because that's what's familiar to you at this point.
I've never heard that before. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. It's like, I don't want somebody else's stuff.
Like if you could see it all laid out.
Yeah. I'll just stick with what I got. Like I'll work with it, because like we're doing okay there now. So
right. But then of course on the outside, we all portray that we've got it all together. Right.
Yeah.
Especially in the social media world.
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother conversation, but I won't go there now.
True.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. Well, with Bridge of Life specifically, if people, I know you have a lot of different ways people can get involved. So if somebody is interested in foster care and adoption, or supporting foster families or adoptive families, what would you tell them? Like, how could they get involved and really make a difference?
I think so much of that for me is conversational. So, and it's interesting because people will call or email and they're like, I want to get involved. And it's almost like they want you to tell them how to do that, and we can certainly do that. We've got programs. So if you want to make a meal, awesome. We've got a program where you can do that and you can deliver it. If you want to help with childcare, my goodness, we have opportunities for you to help with childcare. If you want to swing a hammer. So there are ways we can really easily plug you into something that's going to be meaningful to a family. But I love to have the conversation, because in having the conversation, you get to learn why someone even called you in the first place. What's their motivation? And then maybe what are some of their skill sets, giftings, and passions that might not fall within a program, but could be incredibly beneficial to these families. We have a graphic designer that's done some work, over the years for us for free. Like, when you think, I want to help kids in foster care, and you're a graphic designer, like that may seem irrelevant until you realize by providing those services for free, you're freeing up financial resources to be able to offer a training for families. Absolutely. Or to be able to do a home improvement project. So,
and there's so much, it's specifically like graphic design, it's like there's so much marketing that has to be done with a nonprofit for your events and to raise awareness. That marketing has to be designed in a way that's, people want to look at it and get the information. So
there's a gal who attended an awareness event of ours recently, and she followed up and she's like, I want to get involved. None of the programs that we had necessarily were attractive to her, felt like a great fit. But she goes, I have like 4 hours a week. I'm like, awesome. So now we have a part-time volunteer who's in the office with us like 4 hours a week. That's huge. Like helping with admin stuff or just kind of whatever needs to be done. Even just our partnership with Notion. I mean, you guys came along at the very beginning and said, we have a heart for this. You need a website. How can we work together? So that's your piece of the puzzle. And so again, it's freeing up resources that we would be spending on an incredible website and saying instead, hey, we want to reroute those to something else to where, you can use your financial resources to help families. So those kinds of things. So, let's talk about programs. Let's talk about what your personal giftings and resources are and what you can do. And then sometimes it's like, hey, we're not a great fit for you, but you would be an awesome guardian ad litem, or you would be. So I love that open-handed approach of like, we're not just trying to go, okay, give me all the volunteers, they're all for us. It's like, who are you? Why do you want to work in this space? And then does it make sense for you to connect with Bridge Life, or does it make sense to maybe forward you on to another agency where that particular skill set is going to be better utilized?
Right.
Yeah.
And what if somebody really wants to dig in and go, okay, I'm interested in adoption, whether that be, through the foster system, private, international, or they want to foster. Where do you lead them? How does that work when people come to you?
So that's another one of those awesome conversations, because you can find out so much about somebody, why they made that initial contact in the first place. So, if it's because of infertility, that's a different conversation than if it's an empty nester, So, I mean, it's totally different. And that's why it's like a website is great. We need the website, but we love the opportunity to be able to follow up with a phone call, and be able to connect with families. So, adoption looks so different. It's like, if you want a newborn baby from the hospital, that's private domestic adoption pretty much every time, if that's not as important to you, if you're willing to take a sibling group, a minority group, a child with special needs, an older child, adoption through the dependency system, or like what we know as foster care, that gets a little tricky because foster care, the goal is always reunification, the primary goal. But when you hear about kids who aren't able to reunify, that's when you hear about adoption through foster care. But if you're willing to take on an older kid, a teen, that's a great avenue for you. And that's 100% different process than private infant adoption. So, and then there's international, but
which is a whole other conversation.
There's a whole other thing.
Right. But there's needs in all, like you said, all different ages, all different, just all across the board.
Yeah.
So,
and I think everybody's heart is just kind of bent one way. There are people who say, why are you guys serving in Uganda? We have so many needs here. That's a valid question. I have an answer for that.
Okay, let's hear it.
But there are other people who are like, our kids here have so much, and they really, their heart goes out to an orphan in Uganda, So, but my answer to that is that, here in the States, we've got medical care for kids who are, we won't get political or anything like that, but compared to Uganda, the medical care that we have here is incredible for kids. We have free and reduced school breakfast and lunch. We have all of these nonprofit partners that are able to address child hunger and, all kinds of different social issues that kids run into. That doesn't mean that our kids here don't need loving families. But we have the structure to be able to kind of support a child here. We can always do better. There's always more. But when you take what we have here compared to what a child has in Uganda, it's night and day. You just can't compare. So there, it's like there's no access to clean or running water. There's no electricity. There's no medical care within an hour drive. The roads are atrocious. Women die in childbirth. Like things that we have more than figured out.
And we take for granted in a lot of ways, right?
So to me, it's a both approach. That's why we do both, and we're going to engage some people on one and not the other, and that's okay. Well, and even you mentioned schooling, they have school available, but you have to have a uniform, right? And you have to have these different things and then how do I get to school? And so school access is much more tricky than here, where here you have a bus that can pick you up. And like you said, the affordable breakfast and lunch. So we've seen school in Uganda like under a tree. because there's no physical structure for them to meet in. And, the teachers may or may not show up that day. And kids go to school early and they stay until 4 or 5 in the afternoon and there's no food. Nobody's bringing a snack or a water bottle and there's no lunch. It's like, we would never expect our kids to learn in that environment. and no wonder they are not learning, as well as they could. So it's just it's a different response to different needs, and it's all necessary.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool. Yeah. If you had to kind of think about where is Bridge of Life headed? So we talked about the last 5-10 years, you personally. Where is Bridge of Life headed in the next 5 to 10 years? What are you dreaming of?
Yeah, I think one of our big dreams right now is just that our community in general would be more trauma informed. That we would approach people, kids, adults alike, with a trauma sensitivity. That we would understand that when a baby is born, the way that it's been designed is to be nurtured, taken care of, co-regulated, all of those and things that happen.
That happen naturally.
That should happen.
Safe family, right? The back and forth and
all that kind of stuff. And when those don't happen, there's an absence of them or there's abuse instead. So a baby cries and it's not responded to. It's hungry and nobody feeds the baby. Its diaper is dirty. Nobody changes the baby. Or worse, the baby is abused or the toddler, things that it's hard to talk about, but it's the reality. That's why we're having this conversation. So not only is the ideal situation not happening, but like an incredibly detrimental situation is happening in its place. So then what does that look like when that child's 5? Or when that kiddo's a teenager or an adult. And they
have a particular behavior or something that you're like, what is the deal with this?
Yeah. And so, there's a book called The Body Keeps a Score, and it talks about, it talks about like those hunger cues and things like that. Well, if my hunger cues weren't met as a child, and a caregiver didn't respond in a way that was meaningful and appropriate, what does a hunger cue mean to me as an adult, And so there can be some real triggering things that happen if left unresolved or, unattended to, can be really harmful. So how can we address people understanding that trauma has happened, and just be really sensitive to that? So what does it look like if our police officers understand trauma? How would that change the way that they interacted with a family if there's domestic violence? What if judges understood the impact of trauma on the brain and the body? What if school teachers did? And these are all people who are in positions of helping. They chose those professions because they care about people. But if they don't understand how trauma can impact a person for a lifetime, then they may not respond in the most appropriate way. So for us, that looks like, I think, just continuing to talk about and train. And
that's so good. It's interesting because of all the services that you provide, what you're saying is kind of rising to the surface to you is this education about trauma and how that affects. But that makes sense, right? Because it affects every area of someone's life, whether you're a caregiver of that child or the child who grows up to be an adult. And it's like, what's going on in my life? Like, why can't I get through this particular thing? Or why do I have this reoccurring behavior or addiction or whatever it is? And that's really good stuff. So what are just kind of as we close, what are some ways, in particular with the trauma stuff, that you are getting that message out now? I know you're doing it through the gatherings, but what are some other ways that you're doing that?
So we host a simulcast every year called Empowered to Connect, which is a 2-day, 15-hour simulcast training. We really believe in TBRI, which is trust-based relational intervention. So this idea that we're connecting before we're correcting. A lot of times as parents, we want to mandate behavior. And sometimes the relationship is lost as a result of that, or, damage is done to the relationship. So really connecting with kids and understanding there's a need behind the behavior. So what's the need? Because my child can't always express what that is. So how can I connect with them relationally, get them kind of calmed and soothed, and then allow the teaching moment to happen. So TBRI does that really well, and we really just believe in that model. So we're going to host the Empowered to Connect conference
Awesome.
every year,
Yeah.
as much as we can.
Yeah.
And then all of our trainers are going to have training that's in agreement with TBRI principles. So
Very
that's
cool.
that's kind of the main thing. And then, we have these little pop-up opportunities every now and then where there'll be a simulcast or something like that we can show. And so, we'll step into that space. But I think more and more and more, that's what you'll be seeing is how can we get that trauma-informed TBRI training to this area.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I love it. Love what you're doing.
Thanks.
Keep it up, Jody. And thanks for being on the show. And hopefully we'll have you back again sometime. And
Awesome.
Again, we support you full on % with Bridge of Life. So
we love it. Thanks so
a lot.
much.
All right.
Hey guys, I'm Ryan. I'm the guy behind the scenes, and thank you so much for watching the podcast. If you want to watch more videos like this, make sure you click the like and subscribe button. And I also want to give a shout out to 81A Studios for letting us use the facility. If you want to learn a little bit more about them, make sure you go to 81astudios.com. Thanks.